I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're pairing up with a partner like I did when I moved across Spain last month, as we rank my top 9 gank fights in Soulsborne. Gank fights, duo bosses, multi-enemy showdowns, you love them or you hate them, but you always remember them. The Souls series has some truly memorable experiences, for better or for worse, and today I'll be going over the best, and next Tuesday I'll be going over the worst. To qualify for this list, the fight needs to clearly have multiple enemies to fight, and they need to be tied to the boss health bar. Yes, there are some gank fights where you might fight one boss with some normal enemies around them, but that's not quite what I'm after with this topic, with one exception. I want to see multiple health bars getting drained as I grow stronger. And it's a top 9 because I honestly couldn't think of a 10th gank fight I actually enjoyed in the series, but if I could chuck Liza P in the mix, I would put the first eldest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood fight in 100%. You can check my Liza P videos for why I personally vibe with that fight. So without further ado, my top 9 Soulsborne gank fights ranked. Let me know your favourites down below. Coming in at number 9, we have the sole Dark Souls 2 entry on this list, the Ruined Sentinels. I debated on whether to include the Burnt Ivory King as a gank fight due to the amount of enemies required to reach him, but ultimately decided against his inclusion, and the only other boss I care for from Dark Souls 2 in this sense are the Ruined Sentinels. The 3 of them found in the Lost Bastille are a gatekeep for the second half of the area, and provide a solid challenge for new players on your first visit. My friends and I got stuck at these peeps for a while in 2014, what with their long-reaching weapons, their shields that double as ranged projectiles, and their ability to bring us back to the early 2000s with their Beyblade skills. You want to kill the first Ruined Sentinel before dropping down to face the others, as handling one enemy, even on a small platform, is still more manageable than 3. Once the first is slain, the other 2 activate, and the second may attempt to jump up to your platform to fight you before breaking it, but most players will find themselves in the mosh pit very soon after. Even as an experienced player, I find myself running from their attacks and praying my healing comes through while trying to bait out some of their easier to manipulate moves. It often feels like a war of attrition, and I can't say I've ever fully felt in control of this fight's momentum, but that's not a bad thing. It's one of the few fights in Dark Souls 2 that I always have to mentally prep for before heading in, but in a positive way. It's not a Ludden-Zalen situation, we'll see those next week. Dark Souls 2 does have some other good gank fights, the Skeleton Lords who are pretty underrated despite an interesting mechanic, and Throne Watcher and Defender who are painfully average, but they're not offensive. Maybe it's just the Ruined Sentinels music that keeps it up on this list? Who knows? Coming in at number 8, we have the Bell Gargoyles from Dark Souls 1. And I've always said this fight is the perfect introductory gank for new players. You have to fight 2 gargoyles on the parish roof, and most players will find these guys early on in their playthrough, which gives them a challenge. The first gargoyle will attack with their spear in their tail, long-reaching stabs and thrusts with a full health bar to match, and it allows you to learn the creature's moveset provided you don't roll off the roof to your doom. I find that the Bell Gargoyles really reward aggression, as the closer you are to the opponent, the easier it is to roll through an attack or block and punish soon after with your shield. The second gargoyle only joins when the first hits half health, and will also appear with half its health bar gone, so you've got the knowledge on that first gargoyle's moveset, but then the second starts breathing fire. You've got one gargoyle aggressively attacking while the other passively breathes flames to catch you off guard. It's a balancing act, as the best gank fight should be, but with the nerfed health bar of the second gargoyle, you're more likely to succeed at the fight sooner than you think. You're rewarded with careful positioning, and once one gargoyle is taken out, the fight is as good as won. You can also summon Solaire here for a bit of jolly cooperation if you really are struggling, which evens the odds. It's a nice challenge that is only held back by being such an early game fight. On repeat playthroughs, as much as I adore the gargoyles, they go down relatively easily once I have a decent build, whereas the later fights on this list all last a bit longer and give me more of a challenge. I will say honorable mention goes to Dark Souls 2's Belfry Gargoyle fight, which was my first experience with these enemies. It's not amazing by any stretch of the imagination, it's just reusing assets from the first game, and it does make the player suffer fighting 6 of them, but I have severe Stockholm Syndrome for that fight. I just think it's neat, even with its flaws. Coming in at number 7, we have the true Stockholm Syndrome of this video. It's the Crucible Knight duo, found at the end of the Oriza's Hero's Grave in Elden Ring. I had to think long and hard about which of the fights from this game I wanted to feature, as the main campaign has the Godskin duo, and that's about it. And while during this fight I was practically enraged at how difficult the battle was and how hard it was to bait safe attacks to do damage, I eventually figured out how to handle the Crucible Knight duo without summons or using status effects, in what I consider to be one of my better achievements in the series so far. Crucible Knight Ordovis has his sword, which you're probably used to by this point, while the unnamed Crucible Knight uses the Siluria's tree weapon, and having to balance both of their movesets is part of the challenge. Trying to defeat both enemies at the same time is a recipe for disaster, so my focus was on whittling one down, and then once they're slain, focusing on the remaining knight. And the unnamed Crucible Knight was a perfect first target because their spear attacks often left them at a distance from their companion. It allowed me to get hits in, and I found some of their special attacks easier to dodge with timing, and their combos a bit slower and less lengthy. Of course, this still took a lot of trial and error, but managing to slay the first Crucible Knight and sending Ordovis into a rage was worth the effort. The sword variant of this boss is the one I had the most practice against prior, so it then became a game of muscle memory and keeping my nerve as I dodged attacks I'd practiced in the Stormhill Everjail. You can hear more about that in my video last week. His sword slam that causes brief AoE damage caught me off guard a few times, but once I figured out what I could block, what I could dodge, and my best openings, this battle that at first seemed punishingly unfair became a surprisingly fun dance. It feels like finding a super boss in an RPG. You're not supposed to conquer it easily, and while you can claim the difficulty is very artificial, I found their movesets complemented each other far better than the Godskins did. It took work, but there were patterns to be found and exploits to, well, exploit. As such, while it's not a pinnacle gank boss or anything, I had enough fun to rank it in my top 9. Coming in at number 6, we have the Four Kings from Dark Souls 1. Longtime viewers of the channel know I actually really enjoy going up against these bosses in a regular playthrough. Of course, if I was ranking based on a Soul Level 1 run, maybe I'd have a different opinion, but that'll be coming later this year. As a strength user, this fight for me is a DPS check. Slay the first king before the next one spawns, and pray you've got the damage to pull it off. Because once multiple kings start showing up, well, 3's a crowd, 4's a disaster. Something I love about the Four Kings is that they're one of the few bosses I know that has a sweet spot to their attacks. The tip of their sword does more damage than the hilt, similar to Marth in Super Smash Bros. As such, to avoid taking too many hits, you have to close distance with the boss, stay too far away, and every attack is going to wipe your health bar. But, and this is a fair criticism, get too close and the kings can whip out a few brutal attacks that feel very hard to avoid. Their grab attack, their AoE explosion, and that projectile that has better tracking than the demon from It Follows. If you're lucky and just get some melee attacks, they're easily blockable and you'll have a good time, but I understand why this fight is controversial, in the sense that depending on your build, you could have a miserable time. When I used to fight these guys with a dex build, I struggled hard, but since I'm only talking about my personal experiences in these videos and nothing else, most of my runs against the Four Kings ended positively. Except that time I fell out of the world, still not really sure what happened there, but work, diva. Given I think the four lords of Dark Souls 1 are all relatively weak in terms of their boss fights, I appreciated the Four Kings even more for actually giving me a challenge. Definitely better than Seath's curse damage and tail swipes, Nito's disappointing amount of minions and slow attacks, and the Bed of Chaos being the Bed of Chaos. Let me know your experiences with the Four Kings down below. I'd love to hear some stories, good or bad. Hey viewers, a brief moment of your time. It's February, I'm officially moved to my new home, but the journey for 20,000 subscribers before summer of 2024 doesn't stop here. Take a look at how many of you aren't subscribed, kinda crazy, right? So be sure, if you enjoy the rest of this video, to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future rankings and videos. Back to the list. It's actually crazy just how high we jump in quality from the bottom half of this list to the top 5, and next up, we have the one exception I mentioned in this video's intro, the Abyss Watchers. Some don't consider this fight a gank because technically only one of these enemies counts towards the boss health bar at the bottom of the screen. But in Phase 1, it's entirely possible to end up fighting 2 to 3 Abyss Watchers at a time, which, for me, I feel qualifies it for this list. When you enter, only one Abyss Watcher is standing, your prey, and you have to dodge, shield, and attack the surprisingly fast-moving knight to whittle his health down. Shortly after, another Abyss Watcher with a regular health bar will awaken and also begin attacking you, forcing you to split yourself between 2 enemies while finding openings to strike at your main target. And then shortly after that, a third Abyss Watcher rises up, but can help you by fighting against the other 2 Abyss Watchers on the field. Of course, if you hit them or get too close, they'll aggro on you as well, but it's entirely possible to sit back and just watch the fight happen like the lore suggests. It's a nice twist on the gank boss by giving you a temporary ally while still asking you to manage the enemies around you. The arena is wide enough that you all have space to make distance and stick to your chosen target, and combined with that gorgeously haunting music with the bells, it creates a real impression. The second phase then embers up your main target as the Undead Legion powers him up to fight you with Lady Maria-style flame attacks. In this phase, the flames on the ground are what'll get you, not the sword swings themselves, and yet with your speed in Dark Souls 3, it's much easier to keep up with the new attacks while getting to enjoy the spectacle. It's tame as a gank fight, but absolutely jaw-dropping your first time through as a story fight. Unless you're my boyfriend, in which case you didn't enjoy this fight at all, and it's okay, I can fix you. I'm an absolute sucker for a powered up second phase, but I think my top 4 all lean heavier into the gankiness of it all in a way I really respect. Coming in at number 4, just missing out on our top 3, we have the Twin Princes Lothric and Lorien from Dark Souls 3. Originally, I had this fight as my top pick, my number 1, but upon thinking about the genre we're ranking, I put my bias aside and looked more at the gankery of it all. And while I love Lothric and Lorien to death, they're one of my favourite fights in the series, the gank doesn't happen until Phase 2, and despite having multiple health bars, it doesn't veer into the territory that most think about with this topic. And yet despite that, a number 4 finish is well deserved. Lorien's moveset is one of the most balanced in the game, with fairly telegraphed teleports that you can lock onto to learn the next location he'll appear in. He has a few fun attacks, such as his Flame Arc and his giant light shockwave slam, and once again combined with the music, his Phase 1 is burned into my brain. Phase 2 is where the gank happens, as Lothric comes down to revive his brother with the power of brotherly love and nothing else, and takes on the role of support by brandishing his magic. You have to deal with the same overall moveset, but combined with Lothric summoning homing projectiles or large magic soul spears you have to avoid. It reminds me a bit of Lady Butterfly's magic attacks in Sekiro, tough to dodge and will definitely catch a few players off guard until you learn the timings. My favourite aspect of this fight though is how the only way to end it is to kill Lothric. But he's on Lorien's back, and Lorien almost always tries to face you. So you either have to deplete Lorien's health bar, knocking him down and giving you a few moments to hurt the younger brother, or you have to position yourself in such a way that you can damage Lothric while he's riding his brother's back. It's a unique hitbox challenge that I find really intriguing, and I kind of want to see again. I love bosses that have specific weak points or locations that do more damage, but this is such a unique system in comparison to what we usually get. They're a gank fight, but they're also one being for the entire battle, which is why they don't crack my top 3. I feel the best gank fights need to have that element of facing 2 opponents doing their own thing, as opposed to one fused pair who do things in tandem, if that makes any sense. Taking today's bronze medal, we have the poster men for gank fights across Lordran. It's Ornstein and Smo. While not my favourite fight in Dark Souls or my favourite gank fight, they easily are the most influential to the series. They set a blueprint that many fights would follow. The first ever 2-phase boss fight in Soulsborne, the first true knight-based gank fight, while utilising a classic trope, the fast and slim dexterity knight alongside the large and in-charge hammer-wielding brute. They complement each other's weaknesses in a way that makes them a deadly duo, and they're still inspiring FromSoft to this game, just look at the Godskin duo. Their arena is designed around kiting them away from each other, utilising those beautiful, amazing, stunning, gorgeous pillars. I'll never get tired of talking about them and how those pillars help keep Smo and his massive hitbox away while I wail on the supreme twunk himself, Ornstein. But for all the praise, especially to Smo, as his moveset is honestly pretty flawless, Ornstein is a little bit of a mess. He has a charge attack that, when he hits geometry, he'll just keep using until his tracking lets him continue to your position, and it looks so dumb and feels a bit bullshit to handle. He's got an interesting movement potential, but they didn't have the experience back in Dark Souls 1's era to capitalize. Had he been designed for Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, I likely wouldn't be complaining about it. Depending on which boss you kill first, the other will power up into a super form, which also determines the boss soul and drops you get upon defeating the fight. I prefer to face Smo over Ornstein in Phase 2, his attacks are slower and more deliberate, but if you mess up, it's likely a 1 or 2 hit kill. They both have their pros and cons though. I just love that depending on which order you go in, you can tailor the difficulty of that Phase 2 to what you prefer. So many unique ideas came about thanks to this pair, and they fully deserve a top 3 finish. It just comes down to personal preference with my final 2 picks. Longtime viewers, you saw this coming. Taking the silver medal puts some respect on their names. It's the Shadows of Yharnam from Bloodborne. But Billy, the giant snakes suck, their hitboxes are awful. I mean, in my opinion, just saying, that's a skill issue. Because in my recorded playthrough, I managed to kill them without them using their giant snake attack, so maybe I'm just amazing? In reality, I'm joking, obviously. I just think the Shadows of Yharnam are a fabulous little boss that sometimes gets overlooked, underrated, and deserves to be spoken about as one of the better, if not best fights in Soulsborne for ganks. There are 3 shadows, each with their own different attacks: the Candle Holder, the Katana Wielder, and the Pyromancer. A pure melee fighter, a pure ranged fighter, and one that can flip between both. And with Bloodborne's focus on weapons with crowd control options, it's actually quite easy to do damage to multiple shadows at once, and it's possible to get one locked into a dodging animation if you love a bit of tasty cheese. The aesthetic of the fight in this ruined graveyard as they emerge from the fog, clearly inspired by the Nazgul from Lord of the Rings, which is a major green flag for me, they follow the tried and true formula of one boss being aggressive while the others are a bit more passive, which is exactly what you need in a gank. Once one goes down, or once you get them all to a certain health threshold, the snakes come out and the game changes. As said, the gigantic snake attack with the massive hitbox is a little problematic, but I still think it adds a level of character to their fight when you get to see it, and I'm really sad I didn't get to during my recorded playthrough. Beyond that, just seeing the enemies get more aggressive as the fight progresses while continuing with their overall moveset, it really works wonders and fits in perfectly with Bloodborne's mechanics. They're not too difficult, they're not too easy, but it's a fight that gets a lot of flack, likely because it comes at the end of such a long area. And yet, I've never personally had trouble here with any of my builds. It's a personal pick, but I just want these guys to have that respect, and I'll continue to champion them until the end of time. But taking the gold medal today, we have Dark Souls 3's Demon Princes. The Ringed City DLC may not have my favourite areas in the game, but by God do they go in on the boss quality. And starting off with a gank fight that also acts as a gatekeep to the main part of the DLC was actually a stroke of genius. When you fall into the boss arena, you'll face the demon in pain and the demon from below, both of which have slightly different movesets that you'll have to face off against. One will act aggressive and charge at you, flames strewn across their bodies, while the other will act passive and use poison attacks from afar to try and status effect you. Something I forgot about in my recorded playthrough, forcing me to open my menu and making my footage super ugly for this fight. In my first playthrough of the Ringed City, I remember struggling hard against these guys. I thought their Phase 1 was difficult enough before it was revealed there was a Phase 2, and the amount of health was far greater than I could have expected. They gave Sister Freed a run for her money as one of the most difficult bosses in the game, but on repeat playthroughs, I found the bosses to have a well-balanced level of difficulty, combined with their tendency to stagger, allowing for visceral attacks. Depending on which boss you kill first though, the Demon Prince phase will have different movesets you have to handle. Do you like firestorms? Or do you like giant heat lasers? I always found the lasers easier to deal with, the firestorm just felt too oppressive, but that's because I'm a casual player and not a seasoned practiced pro. I do find it annoying that the Fextra Life wiki though actually gives the wrong information about which demon you kill last, giving which moveset. Would really love to get a better wiki for Dark Souls 3 out there, to be honest. What I love is that both phases of this fight feel like their own battles. I truly think you could cut either phase and you still would have a top tier fight in Dark Souls 3. So having both and combining them together creates something wholly spectacular. It's one of the few endgame fights in any of these games that feels perfectly balanced, giving you enough challenge for the final DLC, and the fact it's a gank fight on top of that is just a stroke of mastery. I especially love how in the first phase, when one of the demons who is on fire tires out, the other demon alights and they switch roles. It has the tailored challenge of Phase 2, like Ornstein and Smo, a vast and unique moveset that is easy to learn but tough to master, and also caps off the storyline of Demonkind for the trilogy. While it may not be my favourite boss fight in Dark Souls 3, and in another list it wouldn't actually be my favourite fight out of some of the entries in this video, I think it wholly deserves to be recognised as the best gank experience in the franchise. Hey, Shadow of the Erdtree, it's your move. And that's my list. Which gank fights are your favourite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my latest videos. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Discord, or my Blue Sky. A massive shout out to my patrons on Patreon for supporting me for another month, and I will see you guys next Tuesday when we look at the worst gank fights in Soulsborne. Adios.